What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Octagon Oracle podcast. Please do not adjust your screens. Yes, I am wearing a shirt, not a hoodie. That's because I have just finished work for the day. Wanted to get some reaction out for UFC Vegas this past week. Look, I'll go through sort of the picks and everything for the moment. Just want to spend a little bit of time talking about the card itself. These Apex cards are getting a little hard to watch for me. I've got to be honest. We're talking about the number one industry here, the number one promotion in the UFC, and fighter pay is a big thing, but why are we holding fights behind closed doors now? It just shouldn't be happening. The roster's big enough to throw some of these fights onto other cards, and I kind of get it, man. It's I've heard the Fight Disciples, for example, say before that this is like a next gen card the Apex cards are a little bit next gen insofar as the fact that you're not going to get too many big names, the people that fight on the UFC roster, but unless you're a diehard UFC fan, then you're not going to be too invested or too aware of some of the fighters on the card. But it's just a bit of everything for me. It's the atmosphere. It just seems a little dull. It served its purpose during COVID. It was cool. It was fantastic. The fact that we got to watch fights and keep up to date with the UFC, for example, during that time was phenomenal. Eddie Hearn did the same thing with the fights in his back garden, basically at Matchroom HQ. So, that sort of thing was superb. But come on, it's served its purpose now. Save the Apex for, put a power slap. Have that in the Apex. Have Dana White's Contender Series in there. Have all the Ultimate Fighter, those sorts of things. Fine, put them in there. Do them from the Apex, but not professional fights. I mean, imagine this as the fighter. The dream is to be signed by the number one promotion in all of mixed martial arts. And for most people, they would concede that that's the UFC. Now, imagine you've got that call, you're signed, you're fighting in the UFC. You've got a big fight coming up. You get given an opponent, you're given a date, and then you find out that you're doing it in the Apex, and you walk out for the first time to fight in the UFC, and you walk 10 meters from backstage into the into the arena itself, into the Octagon itself, to fight in front of I don't know the capacity, if I'm honest, but 100 people, something like that. It's just lost its spark for me, and I feel like these cards suffer. I mean, we will have a run through the card, but I just feel like it doesn't feel like we're watching the UFC up until you get to, you might get a couple of standout performances and whatnot, but they're just not cutting it for me anymore. And it's more the fighters that I feel for. It's not so much the watching at home, because a fight's a fight, but there's nothing better in this world than a big shot landing or a submission attempt or something of that effect, where the crowd is just going absolutely insane. Even when you're watching through the TV, that crowd atmosphere, that crowd reaction to these moments, it's what these guys do it for. Yeah, they're trying to earn some money, but the men and women that fight in this sport do it for the love of the game. And yeah, I'm sure they love fighting, but they don't want to be fighting in an empty place in front of a few people. I mean, that's how they started out. That's what things were like when they first started fighting. It shouldn't be like that now in the UFC. So the Apex for me has run its course, and I'd like to see it disappear. When we talk about actual fight night cards, we've got. If you look at this as a fight night card, and you look at the fight night card that we've got coming up next with Arman Sarukian and Beneil Dariush, there's no comparison between the two cards, and the fact that you've got one in front of a crowd, it just adds to the fighters. It gives them an extra 10% in there, and I just feel like the motivation has gone behind the Apex. But I'm not going to spend too long, bitching and whinging about the Apex, because I do want to talk about the fights themselves. So we'll jump into the main event. Brendan Allen and Paul Craig. What I will say is this, and it's funny because when I decided I was going to do the Octagon Oracle picks, right, I was aware that from time to time I have a little bit of bias, you could call it, insofar as I want a particular fighter to win. I'm a fan of a particular fighter more than the other, and that can impact how your brain tells you the fight's going to play out. And I went with Paul Craig as my pick to get this victory, and I just felt like Paul Craig had functioned at a much higher level. And don't just mean the weight class, but he's been in there with Ankalaev and got the win. He's been in there with Jamal Hill and got the win. There's so many big names that he's been in with. Even when he's lost to some of those guys, the stature of the names that he's been fighting are superior to that of Brendan Allen. So I just felt like Paul Craig was on a different level, perhaps. We know it's not a rounded skill set, but I just felt like Brendan Allen's biggest strength was going to be the ground game. And I just felt like Paul was a match for him there. But I went with Paul Craig because I wanted Paul Craig to win. And that's something that I'm going to learn from going forwards, because it's great to pick the people you want to win, but if I'm delivering picks to people and I'm kind of going with my heart instead of my head, then I'm not doing anything different than anybody else is doing, really. So I'm going to change that moving forwards. But yeah, on the fight itself, I thought Brendan Allen was phenomenal. Let's be honest. People may say that Paul Craig has weaknesses and flaws. I think Paul Craig's a phenomenal mixed martial artist. Yes, he has his moments, but I actually think Paul's much better with the hands than he gives himself credit for. I think when we've seen him actually do some striking, he's looked pretty good. I think the problem with Paul is he doesn't necessarily seem to take a shot too well. And that was evident at light heavyweight because obviously he was up against much bigger guys. And I think we saw it a little bit in this one with Brendan Allen. The couple of times when Brendan did land some decent shots, Paul seemed visibly hurt by them. And they didn't look like the biggest of shots, to be honest. So much so that I actually thought he was playing possum, maybe, but I don't think that was the case. I think obviously up at light heavyweight, Paul's undersized, and that was a big difference. When people like Johnny Walker hit him, it was just he just couldn't take it. He's been open, and I admitted that. And I think down at middleweight, the problem is he is obviously sucking himself down to get there. Yes, not sucking himself off. He's sucking himself down to the weight. He looks great, and he looks like he's doing it properly, and it doesn't look like the weight cut is that hard for him. But when I see him down at middleweight, he does look drawn. It looks like he's done it well. It looks like he's done it right, but it just looks like it's the wrong weight class. He's not one of these guys that's falling off the scales because he can't hold himself up because he's that, that drawn. And I think that is because he's doing it right. But, at the end of the day, when we talk about Paul Craig, bear with me, folks. This is not A-star podcasting, but I've just got a message saying that my battery was running low. So the last thing you needed was me cutting out there without the charger in. But Paul's doing the cut right to get down to middleweight, but he's. I think it was clear that as soon as Brendan Allen hit him, that he was struggling to take that shot. I think he was obviously expecting to be much bigger and much stronger, which he wasn't. As far as the grappling exchanges go, Brendan Allen was superb. I mean, Paul tried to grab the calf, and just. But other than that, we're not. There's nothing really there. It was fun grappling exchanges to a certain extent, but it was kind of dominant from Brendan Allen. And I've got to be honest, I think it kind of made me all in on Brendan Allen, hence the name of the podcast. He's kind of been telling us for a while that he's going to reach the top. and I've had my doubts. But I thought for him to kind of out grapple Paul Craig, who was just, an incredible grappler himself, just showed the level that Brendan Allen is at. So I'm all in on Brendan Allen, and I'm excited for what's next. I know he was calling out Hamzat and he was calling out all these different people. Look, the reality of the situation is this: he's not going to get one of those big fights. He does need a big name, but he's still not right up at the top of the rankings. And I think probably, somebody like a Marvin Vettori, someone around that level, it kind of boosts him back up the rankings. And I think if you get a victory over Vettori in impressive style, then you've kind of, you've proven yourself to be at a higher level. Sort of something of that effect, somebody of that ilk, anybody. Anyway, but yeah, excited for Brendan Allen. Whatever comes next, I'm sure it will be a big name. Someone like a Vettori or somebody, within the top 5, 6, 7, somewhere around that mark. And for Paul Craig, what comes next? I mean, Paul's kind of said before he was not necessarily done at light heavyweight. Does this make him go back there? I don't think so, because I think he is undersized at light heavyweight. I think here, the issue for Paul Craig was that Brendan Allen was equally as good, if not better, on the ground than Paul Craig. And there's not many people can say that. So for me, I think if we get Paul Craig back in there against somebody else, probably still look around that number 10 mark. You don't need to be necessarily looking backwards off the back of that defeat, but I think you want to be jumping up again in the rankings, and I think you want to be looking for somebody around that style that's maybe a little bit more, a little bit less of a threat. Because I think when we all saw this, we realised this was a big fight for Paul Craig, but we were also a little bit like, shit. It would have been nice to maybe pick someone in the rankings that was less of a threat to Paul, just stylistically. But yeah, that was the main event. Got performance of the night for Brendan Allen. I think that was thoroughly deserved. Obviously, getting the submission there in the third round just to seal the deal, to see Paul Craig kind of tap was, something that we're not too used to seeing. So all credit to Brendan Allen. As for the picks that I went for on this one, I had Brendan Allen to... No, I didn't. I had Paul Craig to win this fight. I said he'd get the submission. Obviously, that didn't happen. So, no points for me on this one, unfortunately. So, apologies, everybody, if you followed the picks. But as we jump into the co-main, different story. I said on this one that I was a big fan of Jake Matthews, and I remain a big fan of Jake Matthews. Michael Morales has showed that he's got crazy knockout power. He's finished plenty of guys in his run so far. And I think this was much more composed from him. Wasn't the most exciting fights. Was more of a chest match, if anything. A chess match, if anything. But ultimately, it was one which Michael Morales just edged for me. He didn't look tired. He didn't look fatigued. He was. They made a comment on comms at one point about how he didn't. There was no sweating or anything else like that. So it was impressive to see from him. Jake Matthews, missed out on the decision. I thought it was a relatively close fight insofar as the rounds were competitive, but I edged it to Morales, which gave me the first points as we worked down this card from top to bottom. So, yes, I had Morales by points, which is what happened. So there was a tick in the green box and a tick for the bonus because I got the fighter and the method of victory correct. And then as we move down, we look at Chase Hooper and Jordan Levitt. Now, for me, I was favouring Jordan Levitt, and some people thought that was a little bit crazy. I just felt like Jordan was kind of a match for Chase, and we've seen Chase kind of get clipped a little bit, and I just felt like it was potentially another banana skin for him. But look, at the end of the day, it was fun. It was real fun. the roles, the grappling exchanges, the change of position. It was just constant. It was good fun. Um, if you're a fan of striking, it wasn't really the kind of matchup for you. But from a grappling aspect, it was fun while it lasted, and it was good to see Chase Hooper go out there and get the job done nice and early. And I think you could see kind of what it meant to him just purely based on his reaction. So as far as points go, nothing there for me. It's kind of puts me onto. It's a bit up and down, this one. It was wrong with Paul Craig, correct with Morales. It was wrong with Levitt, and now it's going to be correct again with Amanda Hebas. Before we get onto Amanda, we will just quickly talk about Peyton Talbot and Nick Aguirre. Bit of a tricky one, this, because I thought Nick in the first round looked great, and I thought Peyton looked a little bit like he was struggling with the grappling exchanges. And then as the fight went on, I just think Nick lost any real confidence in himself. He seemed to quit on himself. And I think when we finally saw that sub, the tap was so quick. And, it's not for me to sit here and call fighters out, because what do I know? Like I said, if you saw my TikTok or my stories just recently, I openly admit to being a big fat useless mess. But I just felt like he gave up on himself. It seemed like a mental thing rather than a skill for skill thing. It was just like, to win the first round the way he did, and then for Peyton to turn it around the way he did in the second, it was just like Nick just lost all confidence, and it was a shame to see. But a great win for Peyton Talbot, and I think that'll do in the world of good, having to kind of go through that in the first round and then come back and get the decisive victory in the way that he did. As we move down the card, like I said, Amanda Hebas, Luana Pinheiro. I said that my pick was Amanda Hebas to get the TKO in round 2. And I was pretty confident. I just felt like, it was going to be a bit of a war. It was going to be a bit of a slugfest. And I just felt like Hebas was going to get the better of those exchanges. And then round 1 happens. And as I'm watching round 1 play out, I'm thinking, oh, fuck, I've got this one wrong. Because Amanda Hebas got her ass kicked. Let's be honest. She was absolutely battered from pillar to post in the first round. I thought Luana Pinheiro managed the range well. I thought she moved very well. I think she kept Amanda guessing. We got the typical Amanda Hebas, like all this sort of stuff, but wasn't really doing anything, and all that head movement, and still kept getting clipped. So it was, it was kind of playing out that way. And then round 2, you started thinking, wait a minute, is Pinheiro gassed a little bit? Because she looks, the output had significantly slowed. You could kind of see Amanda Hebas coming back into it a little bit. And then to just finish the third round off the way that she did, that spinning wheel kick to the face, fair play to Pinheiro for staying on the feet, because that landed clean, man. But then it was a case of, it was just a moment of time. It was always going to happen from that moment on. Clipped her again, and that was kind of it. All the writing was on the wall. And just nice to see Amanda Hebas get back to winning ways. I think it's clear that she's still got plenty of work to do. But I thought she showed some heart and some experience to pull through that one and pick that victory up. And yeah, she's always an exciting fight, man. It's never straightforward with Amanda Hebas, so fair play to her. But that one there, like I said, I predicted Hebas and I predicted the TKO. So that's a point in the win column and a point in the bonus column. Just the round pick was wrong. As we look down the card again, next one was the Doctor, Uras Medic, against Oralby. And I'm going to be honest here, I wasn't willing to make a pick on this one, because I kind of thought these guys would cancel each other out a little bit. But I thought Oralby was great. I thought he looked fantastic. I think it was a good, solid win, and I'm excited to see what happens next for him. And then as we jumped to the prelims, we had Jonathan Pierce and Joe Anderson Brito. Competitive fight, interesting fight. I thought that the most impressive thing was the way that Brito snatched that submission, because it kind of came out of nowhere a little bit. He was so quick. He just jumped on it, saw his moment, and bang, got it. And I just thought that was just terrific from him. I thought Jonathan Pierce was, it was fun to see the exchanges where Pierce was talking shit and Brito was, going, or whatever it was he was doing. Yeah, basically saying, shut up fucking talking. And it was fun to see the fact that, slightly after that it was submitted, but good to see both men kind of jump up, shake hands, and yeah, just a bit of fun in there from those two, which was nice to see. And then we had Chad Anhaliger and Jose Johnson. Again, lots of fun rolls. Nice, interesting scrap this. I think the most impressive thing for me was Jose Johnson going for that submission so late. I think the two had been kind of exchanging positions quite frequently. And I thought for him to just continuously chase that submission, it looked like the clock was going to run down and he was going to find his way to a points decision win. But it was nice to see him kind of put his stamp on that and get that one done. And then my final pick of the card was Christian Leroy Duncan. I had him by TKO in round one, missed the round, but got the outcome correct, and it was nice to see. I thought Tululian was game, man. Took some big shots and was quite happy to keep walking forward and keep throwing. But I think the problem you find is that when you're up against a good striker and a skilled striker like Christian Leroy Duncan, you can only walk forward for so long. At some point, he is going to pick you off, and that's exactly what happened. Impressive win for him. And delighted to see him get his hand raised and get the finish. And I think you could see that he was visibly happy about that. And then, so for that one again, that was a correct fight outcome, plus the bonus point for the TKO as well. So that takes the total tally to 19 correct predictions, 6 incorrect predictions, and 7 bonus points for the correct method of victories. We will just quickly scoot across the rest of the card because there is a couple of points here. What I wanted to talk about was the Mick Parkin and Chao Machado fight. It's difficult, man. Being an Englishman myself and Mick Parkin being English, seems a nice kid. It was a hard watch. I don't want to say this really because I don't want to be disrespectful, but I also feel like when I was watching this fight, I honestly felt like this shouldn't be a fight in the UFC because I felt the skill levels of these two just wasn't there. I know we're talking about the heavyweight division here, and maybe it's a little slim pickings as you look for depth, but I honestly I struggled with this fight. I really did. I thought both men looked tired, slow, sloppy. They both kicked my ass. I'm not saying that anything different, but it was a hard watch, and that's kind of all I'm going to say on that one. And then we got Jeka Seragi and Lucas Alexander. And maybe it's because of these two that I thought the Mick Parkin fight was not so interesting, because this one was a belter, wasn't it? It was interesting to see, people were leaning towards Lucas Alexander here. I was sitting right on the fence, hence why I didn't make a prediction, bottled it, and just sat right there. And the main reason was I kind of knew what to expect from Lucas Alexander, but I wasn't really too informed about Sergey. And when the fight kind of started, it was clear that he had power in those hands, but it was kind of going the way I thought. I was leaning towards Alexander, and he was starting to tee off. He was starting to find some success, and then bang, it was all over. Just crazy power caught him, and definitely one to keep an eye on. Is Jake Sergey the most well-rounded fighter in the world? No, he's not. But the kid's got some serious power, and I think he's always going to be game in a fight. I think he's a really, really dangerous one to look out for. Opened as a plus 390 favourite in this, so definitely one to keep your eye on for the future. Don't expect him to be such an underdog next time out, but yeah. Then we had Pudilova and Perez. Decent enough fight to a certain extent. What I will say about it, the biggest talking point was that twerking on the cage afterwards, wasn't it? Um, Even the coach getting involved as well. I found it a little weird that she kind of jumped on the cage and was twerking in the post-fight interview and everything else, and then kind of dedicated the fight to her son, a young son who was sitting in the crowd. I thought that was a little bit strange. Maybe she's just having some fun, but I thought that I found that a little bit weird, if I'm honest. I think pretty much everybody else did. Um, the card opener between Charles Johnson and Rafael Esteban. Another points decision, just one of those things. But the big one for me was the Trey Ogden fight. This kind of got a lot of heat, didn't it? And rightly so, in my opinion. I think you've got Trey Ogden comfortably winning this fight. And then it's just, for it to be called a no contest, it pisses me off a little bit, because this is the problem, and you could see how disappointed Trey was in the octagon afterwards. The fighters go through all this camp, they put in the fight, they do whatever else, they work the bollocks off day in, day out to become better fighters. You get in there, you're dominating the fight, and then something like that happens, and it's ruled a no contest. Just, through no fault of either man. It's just one of those things. It was a mistake by the referee, but it was, why does the fighter get punished? I hope the UFC pay Trey Ogden his win money. I think he deserves that. And I think we're seeing quite a few of these little instances with officials at the moment. Over the last few cards, I think we've seen quite a few, be declared a no contest, or someone being declared a winner when somebody wasn't out. And it needs tidying up a little bit, man. I'm a fan of the UFC. I'm a fan of the officiating and everything else, but I just recently, man, there's been some bad ones, and I think everybody's a human, right? Everybody makes mistakes. The referee on the night got this one wrong. He made a mistake. That's not my issue, because people do make mistakes. If he does that, if he calls it, he's got to call it as he sees it there and then in the moment. Fine. My problem is, what do you do about it next? Do you let the fight continue from where it was? Do you start the round afresh? Do you know what I mean? There's so many other options other than to just go, right, well, he stopped the fight, but he got it wrong, so it's a no contest. Because if you're Trey Ogden, you're pissed. Say, hang on a fucking minute, I was winning the fight, I was there, it was all over. And then the referee makes a mistake, and now what? Now I don't get my win money. It's just craziness, and I think the UFC's kind of got to work on tidying that up, because it is disappointing to see, and I think the biggest problem is that it keeps happening lower down on the card, so it's not really gathering as much traction as it should. I think if you were seeing it in more main events, then we'd be in a different position. But yeah, just a little bit frustrating. So we're coming up to the half-hour mark. I'm going to knock this one on the head there, because there's not really too much else to discuss. As I'm just flicking through here, it's obviously there's no UFC next weekend. And then we've got the next one will be on December the 3rd, which will be between Beneil Dariush and Arman Sarukian. And what I will say about that card is, if we look down it, it's a fucking great card, man. It starts with Veronica Hardy and Jamie Lynn Horth. We've got Wellington Turman and Jared Gooden. We've got Rodolfo Bellato and Ihor Potreira. We've got Steve Garcia against Melchizedek Costa. Give that another go. Then we've got Drakkar Klose and Joe Selecki. Zach Reese against Cody Brundage. And then we've got Misha Tate, Julia Avila. We've got Clay Guida and Hakeem Silva. We've got and then the main card, we've got Khalil Roundtree and Azamat Murzakhanov. We have Punhali Soriano and Dustin Stolzfus. I'm butchering the hell out of some of these, but it's much easier to say if you're getting paid. But then we've got Sean Brady and Kevin Gastelum. What a fucking fun fight that should be. We've got Rob Font and Davison Figueiredo. Same again, man. We've got Dan Hooker and Bobby Green in a five-round co-main event. And then we've got number 4, Beneil Dariush against number 8, Arman Tsarukyan. Just good fights, man. I've got some good picks. Looking at this, I've got a couple of picks that might surprise some people. But yeah, interesting ones to break down. Looking forward to jumping onto that one. The other thing I will just touch on before we do wrap up is obviously the PFL purchasing Bellator. I know it's not UFC, which is kind of what I'm focused on here, but I think that's great news. I'm slightly disappointed if they're going to keep Bellator and PFL as separate divisions. I would have liked to see them merge just under the PFL banner. I think, with all due respect, Bellator's got some great fighters there, but the promotion's terrible. And the PFL are really doing something right. And I think if you bring those fighters across the PFL, you've got some serious competition. I saw they were looking at doing Bellator champs against PFL champs. I think that's fucking great. I think everybody would tune in and love to see that. But it'd be interesting to see what happens here because there's some big names in Bellator. I mean, I suppose the problem is, do they move on? Do things change? But there are some huge names there. There are some fighters which not myself personally, but some fighters believe that some of the Bellator champions and the PFL champions would beat the UFC champions. I'm not buying it. But there are some seriously skilled fighters in there, your Johnny Eblins and some others as well. So I think as we look through the list there, we'd love to see the crossover events. Of course we would, but it's as long as the UFC are the main players in this game, we'll never ever see it because there's no benefit to the UFC to do that. They're already top of the table, but let's see what PFL can do. Saw again Jake Paul talking about Nate Diaz and a crossover fight there. I think we can all, we all know that's not going to happen. I think there's much more chance Nate signs back to the UFC and we see him back at some point, but all fun and games down that avenue. So listen, I am going to try and get something out next week. In fact, I am going to get something out next week because there will obviously be a preview to Beneil Dariush and Arman Tsarukyan at UFC Austin. There will be picks from that card, and I've got plenty lined up ready. They might change between now and then, but I've got a few lined up, and but hopefully I'll get something out earlier on in the week as well to kind of talk about some news or some things that have been happening. But for now, we'll call this one a day. Thank you for tuning in once more. And look, man, we're in for a hell of a run as we come towards the close of the year. Some big fights happening as well. So let's buckle in, enjoy the week off. Let's come back refreshed for Arman Tsarukyan and Beneil Dariush going at it, and that fun card that we've got underneath that too. So thanks for tuning in to the Octagon Oracle. Please tune in to follow me across social medias. As you can see at the bottom, I'm on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter or X, and Instagram. And obviously the videos are uploaded on YouTube, so I'd appreciate any likes, subscribes or comments. And additionally now, I have uploaded the podcast for audio on Spotify. So if you're wanting to listen whilst you're driving, if anything's going to make you crash your car, it's listening to me. But it is there as an option if you'd like to do that. Maybe when you're just laid chilling. So thank you for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.